He said it like it was nothing, like the words didn't weigh a ton, like they didn't leave cracks in my chest that would take years to mend. "You're done," he said, just like that. 4 words that split my world in half. I stood there in the cramped office, the cold fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the smell of stale coffee and ink mixed with the sharp tang of disappointment. His desk was cluttered with folders, reports he probably hadn't read, and a photograph of his wife and kids smiling in a frame. My hands trembled, but I kept them at my sides, nails digging into my palms to stop the shaking. He didn't even look up from his laptop as he said it. "You're done." He tapped the keys as if nothing had changed, as if the words were just another line in a memo, not a knife to my ribs. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. My heart raced and my mouth went dry. I tried to speak to find words that might make him reconsider, but the sound stuck in my throat. My mind scrambled to piece together every late night, every overtime hour, every project I'd poured my soul into. None of it mattered now. None of it saved me from the final judgment. I thought of the mornings I'd left home in the dark, the evenings I'd come home to an empty apartment because I'd been too busy chasing this dream. I thought of the way my mother had said, "You're working too hard, honey," and how I'd laughed it off. I thought of how I'd believed this place was my future, my legacy, how I'd believed that he saw me. He didn't. He saw a name on a payroll that could be cut to balance a budget. The air in the room grew heavier. My eyes burned, but I refused to let him see me break. I clenched my teeth, swallowed the bitterness. If he wanted me to fall apart, he'd have to wait. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. "Is that it?" I finally managed my voice steady, despite the quake in my chest. He paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. He looked up, his eyes cold and impersonal. "That's it," he said. "I'm sorry, but it's final." I didn't believe he was sorry. The words were rehearsed, part of a script he'd perfected. I'd seen him use that same tone when he fired the others. He was always calm, always detached, like he was above it all. I turned away before he could say anything else, before he could try to soften the blow with empty promises about future opportunities or staying in touch. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to remember his voice every time I closed my eyes. Outside, the winter air cut through my thin coat. My breath rose in small clouds, and I let it steady me. The city hummed around me, indifferent to my heartbreak. Cars rushed by their headlights, bright in the gray dusk. People hurried past, their faces turned down, their lives carrying on. I stood there for a moment, watching them, watching how the world didn't stop just because mine had. A part of me wanted to scream, to tell everyone what had happened. Another part of me wanted to hide, to crawl into bed and pretend it was all a bad dream. But neither of those felt right. Instead, I walked. My feet carried me without thinking, down streets I knew by heart. Past the diner where I used to meet friends for late-night pancakes. Past the park where I'd once sat and watched the world bloom in spring. Memories tugged at me, but I kept moving. When I reached my apartment, I didn't bother turning on the lights. I dropped my bag by the door and stood in the dark, listening to the quiet. My heart was still pounding, but the rest of me felt numb. I leaned against the door, the wood solid and grounding beneath my shoulders. For a while I didn't move. I let the silence wash over me, let the emptiness settle into my bones. It hurt less that way. No voices, no pity, no explanations. But as the minutes passed, something else began to stir. It was faint, a flicker in the darkness, a whisper of defiance that had been buried under years of playing by the rules of doing what was expected. It wasn't loud, but it was there. He said I was done. He thought those words would be the end of me, that I'd go quietly, accept my fate, disappear into the background like so many others had before me. But I wasn't like them. I wasn't ready to let him write the final chapter of my story. I walked to the mirror in the bathroom and flipped on the light. My reflection stared back at me, tired and hollow-eyed, but there was something fierce there too, a glimmer of resolve in the set of my jaw, in the way I squared my shoulders. "You're done," he'd said. No, I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I thought of every late night I'd spent proving myself, every obstacle I'd overcome, Every time I'd been told I couldn't, and every time I'd shown them I could. I wasn't about to let 4 words erase all of that. I splashed cold water on my face, the shock of it clearing my head. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling the last of the fear slip away. In its place was something stronger, determination, a promise to myself. This wasn't the end. It was the start of something new, something that wouldn't be defined by him or anyone else. I looked back at my reflection, really looked, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the person I used to be. The fighter, the dreamer, the believer. He said I was done, but he didn't know me at all. I turned off the light and stepped back into the darkness of my apartment. The city was still out there waiting, my future was still out there waiting, and I was ready to claim it. He said I was done. So I started again stronger. The first night was the hardest. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the room too quiet, except for the echo of his voice in my head. You're done. 2 words that turned everything to ash. I couldn't sleep, couldn't shut my mind off. My thoughts spun like a broken record, replaying every mistake, every choice that led me here. It was a kind of torture I hadn't expected. I wondered if he even thought about me after he said it. Probably not. He'd moved on to the next name on the list. I was just a line item crossed off. The weight of that realization settled over me like a winter coat, heavy and suffocating. I kept thinking about how I'd given everything to that job, how I'd believed that working hard would be enough to earn respect, to earn security. I'd believed in loyalty and effort, in the promise that if you showed up every day and gave your all, it would come back to you. But the world doesn't work that way. Not always. Sometimes you give everything you have, and it's still not enough. The sun rose the next morning, and I didn't want to face it. I pulled the covers over my head, but the light still crept in, bright and indifferent. Eventually, I dragged myself out of bed and stood in front of the mirror. My reflection looked back at me, hollow-eyed and pale, but there was something there too. A flicker. A reminder that even broken pieces can be remade. I made coffee because it felt like the one normal thing I could do. The bitter smell filled the kitchen, grounding me. I took the first sip and let it burn my throat, a small pain, to remind me I was still here, still alive. The hours crawled by. I tried to distract myself to keep busy, but every time I stopped moving, the thoughts came flooding back. I went through the motions, cleaning the apartment, making lists of things I didn't really need to do. It felt better to have a task, even if it was pointless. It kept me from sinking too deep. My phone buzzed a few times with messages from people at work, people who didn't know yet, or maybe did, but didn't know what to say. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I didn't want their pity, didn't want their empty words. I needed space to figure out who I was without that job, without that title. It was strange how quickly your identity can slip away. One minute you're someone, the next you're no one. But in that emptiness, there's room to grow. That's what I told myself, even if I wasn't sure I believed it. In the afternoon, I went for a walk. The cold air stung my cheeks, but I welcomed it. It kept me awake, kept me present. I walked without a destination, past familiar storefronts and strangers' faces. The city felt different somehow, like I was seeing it for the first time. Or maybe I was seeing myself for the first time. I ended up at a small park, with a bench overlooking a frozen fountain. I sat there breathing in the sharp air, and let myself feel the ache of it all. The anger, the fear, the betrayal. I didn't push it away. I let it wash over me because I knew that was the only way to let it go. A woman passed by with a little boy in tow. He slipped on a patch of ice and fell, and for a second, he looked like he might cry. But then he got up, brushed off his coat, and kept going. I watched him and thought, that's what I need to do. Fall down, get up, keep going. It's so simple when you're small, before the world tells you that you're supposed to have it all figured out. By the time I got back to my apartment, the sun was setting. The city lights flickered on, one by one, turning the streets into rivers of gold. I stood at my window and watched them glow. There was a quiet kind of beauty in that, a reminder that even in the dark, there was still light. I thought about what he'd said, "You're done," and I realized that maybe he was right in one way. I was done with who I used to be. But that didn't mean I was finished. I could feel something shifting inside me, a small seed of determination breaking through the cracks. I wasn't sure what it would grow into yet, but it was enough to keep me moving. I sat down at my kitchen table with a notebook and a pen. For the first time in a long time, I let myself dream without limits. I wrote down everything I wanted, everything I'd given up on, because I'd been too busy proving myself to someone who never really saw me. I wrote until the words blurred together, until my hand cramped and my heart felt lighter. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight I wasn't done, not by a long shot. When I finally crawled into bed, I didn't feel like the same person who'd woken up that morning. I still felt raw, still felt the sting of those words, but I also felt something else. Hope. A fragile, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. And as I closed my eyes, I held on to that hope like a lifeline. Because if he could say I was done and mean it, then I could say I was just getting started and mean it even more. The next morning dawned cold and bright sunlight streaming through the slats of my blinds and turning the dust motes into tiny golden sparks. I sat at the edge of my bed, wrapping my fingers around a cup of coffee that had gone cold in my hands. My thoughts were clearer, no longer lost in the haze of anger and grief that had kept me up all night. Instead, a quiet determination settled into my bones. If this was the end of one chapter, then I owed it to myself to begin writing the next one. I had nothing left to lose, and that was strangely liberating. I took a shower and let the hot water pound against my shoulders, washing away the last of my doubt. As I stood there, I started making a mental list. Things I'd always wanted to do but never had the courage. Skills I'd wanted to learn but always put off. I realized that for years I'd been waiting for someone else to give me permission. Now no one was going to do that for me. I'd have to do it for myself. By noon, I'd made a real list. It was messy and hopeful scraps of paper, and sticky notes covered my table. Learn to paint, I wrote. Go back to school. Start that business idea I'd always pushed aside. My handwriting was uneven, shaky, but I didn't care. Each word was a promise to myself, a seed I was planting in the soil of my new life. I started small. I cleaned out my closet, getting rid of clothes that didn't fit the person I was becoming. I sold the expensive shoes I'd bought to impress people at the office shoes that had never felt like mine. I didn't need to look the part of someone else anymore. I only needed to feel like me. In the afternoon, I signed up for an online course, something I'd always thought was out of reach. My hands trembled a little as I typed in my credit card number, but when the confirmation email came through, I felt something close to excitement spark in my chest. It was a small thing maybe, but it was a step away from the life I'd been forced to leave behind, and toward the one I wanted to create. I told no one. Not yet. I wanted this to be just mine for a while. No one else's opinions, no one else's doubts. For the first time in a long time, I was listening to my own voice. In the evening, I made myself dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta with garlic and olive oil, but I ate it slowly, savoring each bite. I lit a candle on the table because I wanted to, because it felt like a celebration of what I didn't know exactly, of survival maybe, of beginnings. I sat there in the flickering light and realized that starting over didn't have to mean starting from nothing. I still had my mind, my determination, my stubborn refusal to give up. I still had the pieces of myself that mattered most, and if I could put them together in a new way, maybe they'd form something even stronger. Before bed, I pulled out an old journal I hadn't touched in years. I opened it to a fresh page and wrote in big letters, "I am not done." The words looked back at me fierce and defiant, a reminder of everything I'd survived, and everything I still had left to prove. As I closed the journal, I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. It wasn't much, but it was enough to light a spark in the darkness, a promise to myself that I would keep going no matter how many times I had to start again. I turned out the light and lay in bed, my mind buzzing with plans and possibilities. I didn't know where this new path would lead me, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to find out. The seeds I'd planted today were small, but they were real. And tomorrow, I'd wake up and water them. Tomorrow, I'd keep moving forward. Because he said I was done, but I was just getting started, and I was finally starting to believe it. The next few days were quiet, almost deceptively so. I woke up early each morning, my mind already racing with things to do. There was a certain comfort in the routine. I was building a rhythm to my days that had nothing to do with someone else's expectations and everything to do with mine. Each morning, I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the city come to life. It was my time to dream, to map out my day in the glow of the sunrise. And every day, I tried to do one thing that scared me, one thing that felt like a small rebellion against the person I used to be. One afternoon, I pulled out the paints I'd ordered online, a cheap set, but the bright colors called to me. I hadn't painted since I was a kid, but as I dipped the brush into the vivid blue and let it glide across the canvas, I felt a flicker of joy. It wasn't about making something perfect. It was about giving myself permission to create, to play, to remember that there was more to life than endless deadlines and performance reviews. The canvas was messy, chaotic, but it was mine. That same night, I made a phone call I'd been putting off for weeks. An old friend, someone I hadn't seen since I'd gotten so wrapped up in work that I forgot the importance of real connection. My voice trembled when I said hello, but when I heard the warmth in hers, I felt something ease in my chest. We talked for hours, laughter spilling out, as we traded stories, memories, and plans. For a while, I forgot about the man who said I was done. I forgot about the hollow ache he'd left behind. All that mattered was the sound of her voice and the way it made me feel less alone. It wasn't all easy. There were moments when the old doubts crept back in whispers of, "What if you fail?" that echoed in my mind. But every time they did, I forced myself to remember the small victories. The painting drying on my kitchen counter, the warmth of my friend's laughter, the way I'd faced each day with a little more courage than the one before. One evening, as I was walking home from the library with a stack of books I'd been meaning to read for years, I saw a woman standing at a street corner, her face lit by the glow of her phone screen. She looked lost, her brow furrowed in frustration. I hesitated, then stepped forward. "Do you need help?" I asked. She looked up startled, and then she smiled a soft, grateful smile that warmed something deep inside me. "Thank you," she said. "I was trying to find the train station." I gave her directions, and we talked for a few minutes, our words brief but kind. When she walked away, I realized how good it felt to help someone else, even in a small way. It was another tiny victory, another sign that I was still here, still capable of making a difference. Each day, I added a new line to my list. Take a walk in the park. Try a new recipe. Reach out to someone I care about. They were small things, but they added up, stacking on top of each other like bricks in a new foundation. I wasn't building a career right now. I was building a life, one that felt honest and real and mine. At night, I'd crawl into bed and let the quiet wash over me, no longer afraid of it. I'd think about everything I'd done that day, every step forward, no matter how small. And when I closed my eyes, I felt something like pride stirring in my chest. I was still here. I was still trying. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. He said I was done. But these small victories, these tiny rebellions, they were proof that he was wrong. I wasn't done. I was just getting started. And I was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was stronger than I'd ever known. The first time he showed up again, I was at the coffee shop around the corner, a place I'd started going to because it felt like a safe haven. The clatter of cups, the warm hiss of the espresso machine, the soft murmur of conversations, it felt like life in motion, a rhythm I was beginning to move in step with. I was there with my laptop working on a proposal for a freelance project I'd picked up, something small, but mine. I'd been there for hours, my coffee cold, but my spirit warm when I looked up and saw him standing at the door. He was wearing that same tailored suit, the same air of effortless power. For a second, my heart stuttered. Old habits die hard, and seeing him there, so calm, so sure, made my fingers freeze on the keys. He spotted me almost instantly, his eyes narrowing in that calculating way I'd come to know so well. He walked over like he owned the place, like he still had a right to take up space in my life. Hey, he said, his tone light, almost friendly, like we were just old colleagues who'd run into each other by chance. I forced a smile, my hands curling around the warm ceramic of my cup. Hey, I said. My voice was steady, but inside I felt the tremor of old wounds reopening. How have you been? He asked, sliding into the chair across from me without waiting for an invitation. I hesitated, weighing my words, my heart beating a little too fast. I've been good, I said. And I realized as I said it that it was true. I had been good. Not perfect, not fully healed, but moving forward. And that was enough. He looked around the cafe, his mouth twitching in a small smile. Glad to hear it? He said, his voice smooth, practiced. I've been hearing things. You're doing something new. There. It was the flicker of doubt in his tone, the subtle way he tried to diminish what I was doing. Like he couldn't quite believe I was capable of starting over, like he thought I'd come crawling back any day now. I straightened my shoulders and met his gaze. Yes, I said simply. I'm working on some things. It's been challenging, but I'm enjoying it. He nodded, his eyes cool and assessing. Well, I hope it works out for you, he said. You know it's not easy to make it on your own. A lot of people, they think they can, but it's harder than it looks. His words were casual, but I could hear the warning in them, the reminder that he thought I couldn't do this without him, that I'd fail. I didn't let it shake me. Not this time. I know it's hard, I said quietly, but I'd rather try and fail on my own terms than keep living someone else's story. He looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. And then he smiled, a small, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Well, I guess we'll see, he said, rising from the table. Good luck. He walked out of the cafe without another word, his back straight and unyielding. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were still shaking a little, but beneath that there was something else, relief. Relief that I hadn't let him see me break. Relief that I hadn't let his words undo everything I'd built so far. That night, though, the doubts crept back in. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation over and over. The way he'd looked at me, like he still had the power to decide my worth. The way he'd tried to plant seeds of doubt in the cracks of my new beginning. It was a quiet battle inside my head, and for a moment I felt small again, like a child who'd lost her way. But then I remembered all the small victories I'd collected since that day he said I was done. The way I'd woken up every morning and chosen to keep going. The way I'd learned to trust my own voice, to make decisions for myself, to find beauty in small, ordinary moments. Those were mine, and he couldn't take them away. The next morning, I woke up early and went for a run, something I hadn't done in years. The cold air burned in my lungs, and every step felt like a rebellion against the fear he'd tried to plant in me. I ran until my legs ached, until the doubts fell away like sweat on my skin. When I got home, I stood in front of the mirror, my face flushed and my hair a mess, and I felt strong. I spent the day working on my proposal, pouring everything I had into it. I reached out to people I'd been too nervous to talk to before asking questions, making connections. I took risks, small ones, but they felt big to me. And with every step forward, the weight of his words grew lighter. In the evenings, I let myself rest. I cooked dinner, listened to music that made me feel alive, and wrote in my journal. I wrote about the things that scared me, the things that thrilled me, the things I wanted more than anything. I wrote until the words felt like armor, protecting me from the doubts that still lurked in the shadows. He said I was done, but I was learning every day that he didn't get to decide that. I did. And I was far from done. The next week, I got an email from the freelance project's client. They loved my proposal. They wanted to move forward. It wasn't a huge job, but it was a start, a real start. I let myself feel that joy, let it fill up the quiet spaces in my heart. Because it meant that I wasn't just surviving. I was building something new. I knew he'd be back. People like him always came back circling around like vultures. But I was ready. Ready to stand my ground, to keep moving forward no matter what he said. because this was my life now, my story, and I was finally learning how to write it for myself. He said I was done. So I started again stronger. The days grew longer, and as the light changed outside my window, I felt my world shift with it. There was something about the slow thaw of winter that mirrored the quiet, stubborn growth I felt inside myself. I kept to my routine early mornings with coffee, afternoons of work, evenings of quiet reflection. But I also started to open up in small ways, reaching out to people who didn't know my old story, who only saw the person I was becoming. I joined a local creative group that met every Tuesday evening at a small community center. It felt like a risk, walking into that bright, echoing room filled with strangers. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, the smell of coffee and paint, and old wood welcoming me like a promise. I found a seat in the back, clutching my sketchbook like a lifeline. Around me, people were talking and laughing, their voices blending into a warm hum that was both intimidating and inviting. The leader of the group, a woman named Claire, spotted me and walked over with a smile that felt like sunlight. "Hi," she said, her voice easy and kind. "I'm Claire." First time here, I nodded. My voice caught in my throat for a moment. "Yeah, I managed. I'm new." She nodded, as if that explained everything, her eyes soft with understanding. "Well, welcome," she said. "We're all here because we want to create something that matters. That's all you need to belong." Belong. That word had been a stranger to me for so long. In that bright room, with paint-streaked tables and laughter echoing off the high ceilings, I felt the first flicker of what it might be like to have a place again. The first night, I mostly listened. I watched people share their work poems and sketches and songs that were raw and real. No one judged. No one pretended to be perfect. It was a kind of honesty I hadn't known I was missing. When it was my turn to speak, I hesitated. My voice was small, uncertain. But I shared a few lines from my journal, my hands shaking as I read. When I finished, there was a moment of quiet, and then Claire smiled. "Thank you for sharing," she said. "That was brave. Brave." Another word I hadn't felt in a long time. I went home that night, feeling lighter than I had in months. I slept better than I had in weeks, my dreams filled with color and light. I went back the next week, and the week after. Each time I shared a little more, let my voice grow a little stronger. I started to recognize faces, learn names. There was Mark, who played guitar, like the world was listening, and Jasmine, who wrote poetry that felt like she was carving her heart onto the page. There was Tom, who painted with messy, wild strokes, and Rachel, who stitched together scraps of fabric into something beautiful. We were all so different, but in that room, we were the same. People who wanted to create, people who wanted to be seen. Outside of those Tuesday nights, I still had my work to focus on. The freelance projects were picking up small jobs that paid just enough to keep me going. I poured myself into them, determined to prove that I could stand on my own. It wasn't always easy. There were setbacks and moments when I wondered if I was kidding myself. But every time I walked back into that bright, echoing room, I remembered why I was doing this, why it mattered. One night, after everyone had left, Claire stayed behind with me. We sat on the old wooden stage, our legs dangling over the edge. "You know," she said, her voice soft in the quiet room, "I see a lot of people come through here. Most of them are just looking for a place to hide. But you're here to build something. I can see it in you." Her words settled over me, like a blanket, warm and reassuring. "Thank you," I said, my voice catching. She nodded, her eyes kind. "Don't let anyone tell you who you're supposed to be," she said. "You're the one who decides that." I walked home that night with her words in my chest like a heartbeat. I thought about the man who had told me I was done, how he'd tried to make me feel small. But here in this new world I was building, I was learning that I didn't have to accept his version of me. I could write my own. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, I started to see the shape of my new life. It wasn't what I'd imagined before, not the neat, ordered path I'd once thought I needed. It was messier, wilder, more honest. And it was mine. I kept showing up. To the community center, to my work, to my own heart. I kept saying yes to things that scared me, new projects, new people, new dreams. And with every yes, I felt the old fear shrinking. I felt the woman I used to be fading, replaced by someone stronger, someone braver. There were still moments when the doubts crept in, when I heard his voice in my head telling me I'd never make it. But I had a new chorus now, the voices of the people who saw me for who I was becoming, the people who cheered me on even when I stumbled. My tribe. One night, I stayed late after the meeting, cleaning up paintbrushes and coffee cups. Mark strummed his guitar softly in the corner, and Jasmine read her poems out loud, her words filling the empty spaces. I stood there watching them, and I realized that this was what I'd been searching for all along. Not just a new job or a new project, a new way of living, a new way of being. I wasn't done. I was just getting started. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't alone. Would you like me to continue to Chapter 7, or adjust the style, just direction for upcoming chapters? Let me know. The world outside was shifting, and so was I. Each morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't known in years. My small victories were starting to add up, stacking on top of each other like bricks in a new foundation. I no longer moved through my days on autopilot. I was building something real, something that belonged only to me. One morning after the group meeting, I sat in my small apartment, with a notebook spread across my knees, the sun pouring in through the window. I thought about what Claire had said, how I was here to build something. Those words had echoed in my mind for days, stirring up dreams I'd buried a long time ago. I took a deep breath and wrote at the top of the page, "My vision." It wasn't just a list of tasks or a series of goals anymore. It was a blueprint for the life I wanted to create. I wrote down everything I could think of, ideas for a creative business names, of people I wanted to collaborate with, projects that would challenge me and bring me joy. I wrote about the kind of person I wanted to be, brave, kind, honest. I let myself dream without limits, scribbling down possibilities that once would have seemed impossible. As I wrote, I felt a rush of excitement that almost made me dizzy. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about building something bigger than I'd ever allowed myself to imagine. I realized I didn't have to prove anything to anyone, not to him, not to the people who had doubted me, not even to the version of myself who had been too afraid to try. This was about proving to myself that I was capable of more than I'd ever thought possible. That afternoon, I took my notebook and walked to the little cafe where I'd first seen him again. I sat in the same seat, but this time my hands didn't shake. I ordered a coffee and opened my notebook, spreading out the pages like a map of my new life. I let myself dream, let myself believe that every scribbled idea and every half-formed plan was a seed waiting to grow. I spent hours there, lost in possibility. When I looked up, the sun had dipped low in the sky, and the cafe was bathed in a soft golden light. I closed my notebook and held it against my chest, feeling the weight of all those dreams heavy but exhilarating. The next morning, I woke up and started putting those dreams into action. I reached out to people I admired, sending emails and messages that made my heart race. Some of them didn't respond, some did. And with every small step, every tiny risk, I felt the foundation of my new life growing stronger. I started working with a local artist who needed help promoting her work. I helped her set up a website, took photos of her paintings, wrote stories about the way her art captured the world in colors and light. It wasn't a big job, but it was the first time I'd been paid for work that felt like mine, creative, meaningful, honest. And with each task I took on, I felt my confidence grow. I also kept going back to the creative group on Tuesday nights. Each time I walked into that bright, echoing room, I felt more like I belonged. I shared more of myself, let my voice grow stronger. I stopped worrying so much about whether my work was good enough. I let myself be messy, let myself make mistakes. And every time I did, I found that the world didn't end. In fact, it opened up. One evening after the group, Claire pulled me aside. "I can see you're finding your voice," she said. "Have you ever thought about leading a workshop?" I blinked at her, startled. "Me?" She nodded. "You have a gift for bringing people together, for helping them see their own potential. I think you'd be good at it." The idea terrified me, but it also lit a spark in my chest. I'd spent so long letting other people define my worth. Maybe it was time to show myself what I was capable of. That night, I sat down with my notebook and wrote out a plan for the workshop. It would be about creativity, but also about resilience, about how art and stories and small acts of courage can rebuild a life. I didn't know if anyone would come, but I wanted to try. For the first time in a long time, I wanted to take up space, to share what I'd learned in the quiet, stubborn hours I'd spent rebuilding myself. I announced the workshop the following week, my voice trembling but sure. People signed up. Not many, but enough to fill the small room in the community center. And as I stood in front of them that first night, my hands shaking, I felt something shift. I was terrified. But I was also exactly where I was meant to be. I told them my story, the story of being told I was done, of feeling like everything I'd built had crumbled around me. I told them how I'd started again, one tiny step at a time, until those steps added up to something I could stand on. And as I spoke, I watched their faces soften, their shoulders relax. I realized that sharing my story didn't make me weak. It made me real. And in that room, being real was enough. After the workshop, people came up to thank me, their voices quiet but full of hope. I needed to hear that one woman said, her eyes bright, "I've been feeling so lost, but you made me feel like it's okay to start over." I hugged her, feeling the truth of it in my bones. It was okay. More than okay, it was necessary. As I walked home that night, the city lights flickering like stars, I felt a deep, quiet pride settle in my chest. I wasn't the person he'd said I was. I wasn't done. I was building something new, something brave, and I was finally starting to believe in the vision I created for myself. He said I was done, but standing there in the glow of streetlights, with the echoes of laughter and hope still warm in my ears, I knew he was wrong. I was just getting started. And this time, I wasn't doing it alone. I was getting used to the sound of my own voice again, used to speaking my truth, sharing my dreams. Each time I did, I felt the tightness in my chest ease a little more, the doubts loosening their grip. But the thing about starting over is that it doesn't come with guarantees. And sometimes, even the strongest walls you build can still feel shaky when the wind changes. A week after my workshop, I was back in my small apartment, working on a project that felt like the first real step toward the business I wanted to build. My head was buzzing with ideas and plans, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of real momentum. But just as quickly as it had begun, the world seemed to tilt under me. It started with an email, just a few lines, that shattered my fragile confidence. The artist I'd been working with had decided to go in a different direction. She thanked me for my help, said she'd found someone more established. It wasn't personal, she said, but of course it felt that way. My stomach dropped as I read her words over and over, each one a little paper cut to the skin of my pride. I closed my laptop and stared at the blank wall in front of me. For a moment, the old fear crept back in like a cold hand on the back of my neck. Was this proof that he'd been right all along? That I wasn't good enough? That I was only pretending at this new life? I didn't want to believe it. But the doubt settled in like a stone in my chest. I tried to fight it by going for a walk, breathing in the cold air, and watching the city move around me. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that email. Every time I took a step forward, it felt like the ground was crumbling under me. The next day, I forced myself to show up at the community center, even though I wanted to hide. The creative group was already in full swing when I arrived, the room alive with voices and laughter. But for the first time, I felt like an outsider. My mind was somewhere else, stuck in the loop of, what if I'm not enough? Claire noticed. She always did. After the meeting, she found me sitting in the back corner, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea I'd barely touched. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice gentle but insistent. I hesitated, the words caught in my throat. But when I looked at her, I saw only kindness. So I told her about the email, about the way it felt like a door slamming shut. She listened without interrupting, her eyes steady and calm. When I was done, she reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry," she said. "That hurts. It's okay to feel it." I nodded, blinking back tears. "But here's the thing," she continued. "One person's decision doesn't define your worth. It doesn't erase the work you've done or the dreams you've built. You're still here, and you're still enough. Her words settled into my bones, soft but solid. I took a shaky breath and let them in. It didn't erase the sting of rejection, but it reminded me that it wasn't the end. That night, I went home and opened my notebook again. I wrote down every fear, every doubt that had been clawing at me. I let the words pour out until the page was a mess of ink and hurt. And then, at the bottom, I wrote, I am still here. I am still enough. The next morning, I woke up and made a choice. I wasn't going to let one setback stop me. I reached out to other artists, other creators, people I admired, and wanted to learn from. I offered to help for free to learn to build connections. Not because I wanted to prove anything to anyone else, but because I wanted to prove it to myself. That I could keep going, even when it felt like the world was pushing back. Not everyone said yes. Some people ignored me, some turned me down. But a few doors cracked open, and that was enough. Each tiny yes felt like a seed I was planting in the rocky soil of my new life. The work was hard, harder than I'd expected. There were nights when I sat up late staring at the glow of my computer screen, my eyes burning with exhaustion. There were mornings when I wondered if I was chasing a dream that would never pay the bills. But every time the doubts came, I thought of that room at the community center, of the way the light filtered through the dusty windows and made everything feel possible. I thought of the woman who'd told me she felt seen because of my words, of the way Claire had looked at me, calm and sure, and said, "You're still enough." I clung to those moments like lifelines. One rainy afternoon, as I was packing up my things to leave a cafe, I saw him again. The man who'd said I was done. He was standing by the door, his expression blank, as his eyes met mine. For a moment, the old fear surged up, thick and choking. But then I felt something shift. I realized I didn't care what he saw when he looked at me. I wasn't here for him anymore. He walked over his mouth, pulling into a thin smile. Still trying to make it work, he asked, his voice dripping with polite disdain. I met his gaze, my own steady. "Yes," I said simply. "I am." He didn't have a comeback for that. He just looked at me for a moment, then walked away. And as I watched him go, I felt something in me settle, like a door closing, but this time, it was me who closed it. I walked home in the rain, my coat soaked through, and my hair plastered to my face. But I felt warm inside, because I knew that every obstacle, every setback, was just another part of the story I was writing. A story that was mine alone. He said I was done, but with each breath, each step forward, I was proving that he was wrong. I wasn't done. I was just getting started, and I was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping softly against the window, a rhythm that felt like a promise instead of a warning. I sat up, wrapped in the quiet hush of the early hour, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to calm. Maybe it was because I'd survived the worst of it, the rejection, the doubt, the echo of his voice telling me I was done. Maybe it was because I'd learned that even when the world felt like it was closing in, there was always a way forward. I pulled on a sweater and made coffee, the warm scent filling my small kitchen, like a comfort I'd almost forgotten I needed. I opened my notebook and read the words I'd written the night before, "I'm still here. I am still enough," and let them settle into my bones. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. I spent the day working on a project that had been simmering in my mind for weeks, a collaboration with another artist I'd met at the creative group. We'd talked about it in passing, both of us too nervous to admit how much we wanted to make it real. But that morning, with the rain soft and steady outside, I reached out to her with a simple message. "I'm ready if you are." She wrote back almost immediately. "Let's do it," she said. Those 3 words felt like a door swinging open, letting in light I hadn't dared to hope for. We met that afternoon in a small, cozy cafe, our heads bent close together as we sketched out ideas and plans. We were building something from nothing, and for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like I was doing it alone. The project took over my days and nights, filling them with purpose. We worked late into the evenings, the glow of our laptop screens, the only light in the room. We shared stories and laughter and small, quiet fears. And with each hour we poured into the work, I felt the weight of the past slipping away. It was still there like a scar I'd always carry, but it wasn't holding me back anymore. One evening, as we were finalizing the last pieces, she looked at me and said, "You know, I think we're really onto something." I felt my heart swell with pride, a warmth that chased away the last of the chill. "I think so too," I said, and I meant it. A week later, we shared our project online, a series of short films that combined our art, our voices, our stories. We didn't know what to expect, didn't dare to hope for more than a few kind comments from friends. But by the next morning, the videos had been shared hundreds of times. Messages poured in from strangers who said our work had touched them, made them feel seen in a way they hadn't known they needed. I sat at my kitchen table, reading those messages with tears in my eyes. Not because I was sad, but because for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My hands shook as I typed out replies, each word a quiet thank you for the connection, the understanding, the proof that maybe I wasn't alone after all. The project took on a life of its own, opening doors I hadn't even known were there. A local art space reached out, offering us a spot in their next exhibit. A small publisher wanted to feature our work in a collection. Each new opportunity felt like a hand reaching out, pulling me further into the light. But even in the midst of that joy, the old fears still tried to creep in. There were moments when I'd catch myself holding my breath, waiting for it all to fall apart. I'd hear his voice in the back of my mind, "You're done," and for a heartbeat I'd believe it. But then I'd remember the way people had reached out, the way they'd said, "This matters," and I'd take a breath and keep going. The night before the exhibit, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind buzzing with nerves and excitement. I thought about everything that had led me here, the heartbreak, the doubt, the tiny steps I'd taken to rebuild my life. I thought about the girl who'd once believed that her worth was tied to someone else's approval, and I realized she was gone now, replaced by someone braver, someone who had learned how to stand on her own. At the exhibit, I stood in the corner of the room, watching people move through the space. They stopped to look at our work, their faces soft with wonder and curiosity. I heard snippets of conversation. "This is so beautiful. It feels like it's speaking right to me." Each word felt like a balm to the old wounds, a reminder that my voice mattered. Claire was there too. She found me near the end of the night, her smile warm and proud. "You did it," she said, her eyes bright. "You turned the hurt into something beautiful." I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said. She shook her head gently. "You did it because you believed in yourself. Don't ever forget that." As the night wore on, I stepped outside into the cool air, the city lights twinkling like distant stars. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the quiet hum of the night. I thought about how far I'd come, about how many times I'd fallen and gotten back up. And I realized that every step, every misstep had led me here. He'd said I was done, but standing there, the city alive around me, and my heart full of possibility, I knew he'd been wrong. This was just the beginning, and I was ready for whatever came next. The next few days passed in a rush of energy and excitement. Our project at the exhibit had been more successful than I ever imagined, and every new message or opportunity felt like another confirmation that I was on the right path. But beneath the excitement, there was something else growing too, a quiet, steady sense of peace. The kind that comes from knowing you're finally living in your own truth. I kept working on new projects, collaborating with people who inspired me, pushing myself to learn more and reach further. My days were filled with early mornings at my desk, long afternoons at the community center, and late nights sketching out ideas in the quiet of my apartment. I wasn't chasing perfection anymore. I was chasing what felt real, what felt mine. One morning, I woke to find an email waiting for me. It was from a well-known publication, a place I'd only ever dreamed of seeing my work. They'd seen the exhibit, seen my part in it, and they wanted me to contribute a piece, my voice, my story, in print, for anyone to read. My hands shook as I read the message over and over, the words blurring with tears. Not because I doubted I was capable, but because for so long I'd been told I wasn't. And now, here it was proof that I was. I spent the next few days writing the piece, pouring everything I'd learned and lost and found into those paragraphs. It wasn't just about the art or the project, it was about the journey, about how the hardest parts of life can break you open and let something new grow in the cracks. When I hit send, I felt like I was letting go of something heavy I'd been carrying for years. The article went live the following week, and the response was overwhelming. Messages from strangers poured in, people who said my words had made them feel seen, who said they felt less alone because I'd shared my story. Each message was like a small light in the dark, a reminder that even in my most vulnerable moments, I wasn't alone. None of us were. But even as the praise rolled in, he was still there in the back of my mind, the man who'd said I was done. His voice was quieter now, more like an echo than a presence. But every once in a while, it would still rise up trying to tell me I wasn't enough. That all of this new life I was building, was just a dream waiting to fall apart. One evening, I ran into him again. I was leaving the community center, the sky streaked with pink and gold, when I saw him waiting by the curb. He looked almost the same as before, confident, composed, but there was something different in the way he held himself. A flicker of uncertainty, maybe. Or maybe that was just what I wanted to see. He walked over his mouth, pulling into a small smile. "I saw your name in that article," he said. "Impressive." I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment settle over me. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. He tilted his head, studying me. "You've really turned things around," he said slowly, like he couldn't quite believe it. "I didn't think you had it in you." For a moment, I felt the old anger rise up hot and sharp, a flash of memory that made my hands clench at my sides. But I took a breath and let it pass. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his doubt either. "I did," I said simply, "and I will keep going whether you believe it or not." He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something else, but I didn't wait. I turned and walked away, my heart pounding, but my head held high. Behind me, the city hummed with life, and I felt every step echo like a promise. I didn't owe him anything, not my pain, not my success, not my story. When I got home, I sat by the window and watched the lights of the city flicker on one by one. I thought about all the times I'd been told I wasn't enough, all the ways I'd been made to feel small. And I realized that every time I'd chosen to keep going, I'd taken a piece of that power back. Piece by piece, I was rewriting my story, not to erase the past, but to claim my future. I still had so much to learn, so much to build. But that night, as I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I felt a calm settle in my chest. Because I knew that I wasn't done. I knew that there would be more obstacles, more moments when I doubted myself. But I also knew that I had found something stronger than any of those fears. I had found my voice. I had found my people. And most importantly, I had found the courage to keep going, even when it felt like the world was telling me to stop. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I thought about all the ways life had surprised me, how the worst moments had led to the best ones, how every setback had been a chance to grow. And I realized that maybe that was the point. Not to have it all figured out, not to never fall, but to keep rising again and again, each time stronger than before. He said I was done. But as I closed my eyes, I knew one thing for sure: he was wrong. I was only just beginning. I woke up the next morning with a sense of quiet resolve. The fear that had once felt like a constant shadow was gone, replaced by something steadier, a kind of calm strength I'd never known I had. I went about my morning as if it were any other day, coffee brewing, the soft light of dawn creeping through my window, the city outside waking up in a slow, graceful hum. But inside me, there was a sense of anticipation, a feeling that something was about to change. The email came just after lunch. It was from a major creative conference, a place I'd only ever dreamed of attending, let alone speaking at. They'd seen the article I'd written, the project I'd created, and they wanted me to come share my story. My story. The same one he'd said was over. I sat there reading and rereading the email, my hands trembling, but my heart sure. I could almost hear his voice in my head. You're done. And for the first time, it didn't make me flinch. It made me smile. I accepted the invitation before I could second guess myself, my fingers flying over the keyboard. The words felt bold and bright as they left my hands. Thank you for the opportunity. I'd be honored. When I hit send, I sat back in my chair and let the feeling wash over me. This wasn't about him anymore. It wasn't even about proving anything to anyone else. It was about showing up for myself for the person I was becoming. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I spent my days writing and rewriting my talk, crafting it into something that felt honest and real. I practiced late into the night, speaking to my reflection in the window, until the words felt like they lived in my bones. Each time I spoke them aloud, I felt the old fear fade a little more, replaced by a fierce kind of pride. The night before the conference, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and took a long, steady breath. I thought about everything that had led me here, the long nights of doubt, the small victories that had pulled me forward, the people who'd seen me, even when I couldn't see myself. And I realized that every step, every stumble, had been worth it. Because they'd brought me here to a place where I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. The next morning, I walked into the conference center with my head held high. The room was filled with people faces I didn't know, but each one a witness to the journey I was about to share. As I stepped onto the stage, I felt a moment of quiet panic. But then I saw Claire in the audience, her smile calm and steady, and I remembered who I was. I began to speak, my voice a little shaky at first, but growing stronger with every word. I told them about the day he'd said I was done, about how those words had almost broken me. I told them about the small, quiet steps I'd taken to rebuild, about the nights I'd spent questioning everything, about the mornings when I'd chosen to keep going anyway. I told them about the community I'd found, the art I'd created, the way it felt to finally stand in my own light. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then the applause started soft at first, then louder, a warm wave that washed over me. I stood there, my heart pounding, and realized that this was it. This was the sweetest revenge. Not the applause itself, but the knowledge that I'd kept going, that I'd built something real and beautiful from the ashes of what he'd tried to destroy. Afterward, people came up to me, their eyes bright and kind. They told me how my words had moved them, how they saw their own struggles in my story. Each one was like a balm to the old wounds, proof that sharing my truth had been worth it. I took their words and held them close, a reminder that every time I'd chosen to speak up, instead of stay silent, I'd given someone else permission to do the same. Later, as I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I thought about him. I wondered if he'd ever think about me, if he'd ever understand the way his dismissal had set something in motion I didn't even know was possible. But then I let the thought go. Because the truth was, it didn't matter. His opinion didn't define me anymore. It never really had. I walked home that night with a smile on my face, the city lights dancing around me. I felt like I was seeing the world through new eyes, every streetlight, every window glowing with possibility. The weight I'd carried for so long was gone, replaced by something lighter, brighter. A sense of freedom I'd never thought I'd feel again. When I got home, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote in my journal. I wrote about the conference, about the people I'd met, about the way it felt to stand in front of a room full of strangers and know that my story mattered. I wrote about the quiet revenge of living well, of building a life that wasn't about proving him wrong, but about proving myself right. I ended the entry with a single sentence. He said I was done, but I was just getting started. As I closed the journal, I felt a quiet kind of triumph settle into my bones. The kind that doesn't shout or scream, but hums like a steady drumbeat in your chest. The kind that no one can take away. I knew there would still be hard days. There would still be moments of doubt, moments when the old fears tried to creep back in. But I also knew that I had everything I needed to face them. My voice, my art, my people, my own unwavering belief that no matter what anyone else said, I was enough. He said I was done. But as I looked out my window at the lights of the city, I knew the truth. I wasn't done. I was just beginning. And the sweetest revenge wasn't in proving him wrong. It was in living a life so full, so real, so beautifully mine, that his words didn't matter at all. The next morning, I woke up with the sun streaming through the window, warm and golden and new. I lay there for a moment, feeling the quiet weight of everything I'd been through, the journey that had brought me to this moment. And then I smiled. Because even though the road had been harder than I'd ever imagined, it had also been beautiful in a way I was only just beginning to understand. I got out of bed and made coffee, the smell filling my small kitchen with warmth and comfort. As I sipped it, I thought about the girl I'd been when this all started, the girl who'd believed that her worth was measured by someone else's approval, who'd been willing to shrink herself to fit into a life that didn't fit her. I thought about the moment he'd said, "You're done," and how it had felt like the end of everything. And then I thought about the woman I was now, stronger, braver, more willing to stand in her own light. A woman who'd learned that her voice mattered, that her dreams mattered, that she didn't need anyone else's permission to live the life she wanted. I spent the day working on new projects ideas that had been simmering in my mind for weeks. Each one felt like a seed I was planting in the soil of this new life, tiny but full of possibility. I reached out to people I admired, shared my ideas, asked for their thoughts. The conversations that followed were full of warmth and excitement, a reminder that when you're brave enough to share your dreams, the world often meets you with open arms. In the afternoon, I went for a walk through the city. The air was cool and bright, the trees bursting with new leaves. Everywhere I looked, there was a sense of renewal, of things waking up after a long winter. I thought about how, in a way, I was waking up too, becoming someone I'd only ever glimpsed in the quiet corners of my own heart. And I realized that I wasn't just rebuilding, I was creating something entirely new. As I walked, I passed the cafe where he'd once told me I was done. I paused for a moment, my reflection caught in the window. For a heartbeat, the memory stung, a flicker of the old pain. But then I looked closer and saw the woman staring back at me. She didn't look broken. She looked calm, certain, whole. And in that moment, I knew that he hadn't ended anything. He'd only set me free. I kept walking, each step a quiet act of defiance, of hope. By the time I got home, the sun was starting to set, painting the sky in streaks of gold and pink. I sat by the window and watched the light fade, feeling a quiet kind of peace settle over me. Because even though I knew there would still be hard days ahead, days when the doubt crept in, days when the past felt too close, I also knew that I had everything I needed to face them. I picked up my journal and wrote the words flowing out of me, like water. I am not done. I am not broken. I am stronger than I have ever been. I read them over and over, letting them sink into my bones. Because they weren't just words. They were the truth. Later that evening, I called Claire. We talked about the workshop I wanted to lead, next the new ideas I was exploring. She listened, her voice calm and warm, and then she said, "I'm so proud of you." I felt my throat tighten, the old urge to deflect or downplay her words rising up. But I swallowed it down and said, "Thank you. I'm proud of me too." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything I'd learned. That sometimes the things that feel like the end are really just the beginning. That the sweetest revenge isn't proving someone else wrong, it's living a life that feels true and real and yours. That the only person who can decide when you're done is you. And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of quiet certainty settle into my bones. Because I knew, truly knew, that I wasn't done. I was just getting started. So to anyone who's ever been told they're done, to anyone who's ever felt small or invisible, know this: you are not done. You are not broken. You are so much stronger than you think. Keep going, keep dreaming, keep fighting for the life you want. Because the only person who gets to decide your story is you. He said I was done. But here I am, alive, awake, and ready to write the next chapter. And I promise you this, it's going to be a good one. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're ready to start your own journey, no matter how small the first step may feel, take it today. Because you're not done. You're just getting started.